It's 2 o'clock. And what happens at 2 o'clock? It's live demo time. And this week, if you've been following, you know that we're doing a series on back to basics with watercolours. I'm just trying to find this page so I can see your comments. See if anybody's on yet. Say hello. It seems to be that my phone works really well most of the time until I really want it for something particular. Sally, hello Sally. Oh, yeah, when I want it for something particular, it decides to go on a go slow and is refusing to load the comments. Yes, I know I'm live. Sorry about the top of my head, guys. Hello, Joy. How are you today? Another lovely day we have in paradise in our homes. We'll just wait a little bit longer for some more people to join. At the moment, I can't see how many are on because my stupid phone isn't loading. I shall try and come out and go in again. What's it they say about computer problems? Turn it off and on again. That's usually the answer. Ah, here we go. I've got it. 10 of you. Wow. Sorry, guys. I'm just waiting for my phone to catch up with the rest of the world. It seems to have a pace of its own these days. I think our internet connections are usually really good. However, everyone's using it at the moment. So, hi, Nina. How are you? Nina was with me last night doing my pastel class, doing our wolf. I've not been able to post everybody's pictures yet because I think they want to finish them off. So yeah, last night was one of our virtual classes and this is what they were working on. So this is my version. Again, not quite finished yet. But yeah, it was really good fun. And Nina did particularly well. So welcome along, Nina. Who else have we got? Joy. Anyone else going to say hello? 15 on today. I think because I'm doing the same thing and doing watercolour back to basics, people might not find it as exciting as the other things that I've got going on. So, yeah, well. Oh, Becky's on as well. Hello, Becky. Sandra. Hi, Sandra. Okay, I'm going to leave my phone to do its thing. It's so way behind everyone else. Okay, so we're doing another little landscape today, but first, before we go into that, we're going to do some techniques and look at some other ways of making marks. Hillary's on. Hillary, happy anniversary. I hope you're being spoilt today or you're doing the spoiling. And Gay's watching as well. Excellent. Oh, 20 of you. Not so bad for watercolour techniques. Okay, so I did post out earlier some tools. If you're going to paint along, it's good to have stretched your paper beforehand for the final piece and maybe have some scraps of paper. Hello, Sue. Oh, don't worry, Sue. I've just posted another pastel class actually this morning that's coming up, a pastel landscape, which would be cool. Sand dunes. Margaret's watching. Excuse me, someone at the door. The noises in this house when someone approaches the front door. Seriously, you'd think someone was being murdered. Okay, so I'll just move this to one side. So this is what we're going to attempt later on in the class. Okay, so let me get a scrap of paper. So I've already taped and stretched my paper for the main piece. I'm just going to get a scrap of paper and talk to you about some tools I'm using today. So the stippling brush, okay, the stippling brush. This is a child's art brush, cheap one for about 20 pence. And I've cut the end, just cut flat across the top. to give it a nice flat. There's like a type of brush you'd use for stenciling, you know, getting in the stencil and putting marks down. Those are really good tools to have in your watercolour armoury, so that you can make patterns and different types of marks to indicate texture. So we're going to be playing with that. I've got my normal brushes, so my normal watercolour brush and a Diddy one, because there's some fine little bits we'll be playing with later. I'll put those back there. I've got a craft knife. How bizarre. A craft knife. Any kind of blade that you've got, all will become clear. And I've also got a flat brush. I just want to talk to you a little bit about flat brushes and the different types of marks you can make with a flat brush. I probably won't use this in the painting today, I don't think, but yeah, good for you to know about. I've got my normal set of watercolours and I've got my mixing palette ready to go. Then the unusual objects are my sponges. So natural sponge, obviously, as you all know, has big open holes in it, so you can get some really interesting patterns. We are going to be using that in our painting. Afternoon Pam. And I've also got, this is just a kitchen sponge, a synthetic sponge, so much tighter knit sponge, less patterns that can be made, but different patterns. So also another good tool. I just tear chunks off of it, the size that I need. As you can see, the same applies here. Here's ones I was using earlier, covered in green paint. But they're good because you can just wash them out when you're finished with them. So I'm going to talk to you about the stippling brush first. So the stippling brush, you can do so much with it. So I'm just going to get it wet and tap it directly into my pan. I'm going to go into the green to load up. You only want the paint in the bristles, guys. You don't want it soaked. So a little bit of water, tap it onto your pan brush, and then you can just paint with it using the side of your brush. So tilt it on the edge of the bristles and flick it up, and you'll get these really interesting marks coming down on the paper. It's a bit light for you to see. It's quite bright in here today, that damn sunshine. So that's using it fairly wet. So it just gives you, as you come out of the wetness, bring your brush back in and scrape it through. You can get this nice texture for long patches of bushy grass. Really good for laying in large areas of grass. Let me hold this up. I don't know if it's just me that can't see my screen. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. Okay, but how I like to use it better is to just wash that out a minute. I'm dabbing off on my tissue all the excess water. I want this dry brush. This is a dry brush technique. I'm going to load it with my green paint again, and I'm going to tap the excess out on the tissue. Again, tilting the brush on its side, I'm going to pull that brush. Still fairly wet. And look at those marks that you get for applying grass. It's perfect. The drier it is, the finer the line. Okay, so if you want finer lines, just tap it off a bit more, or use a scrap of paper, and you're just flicking. So you're putting the edge of the brush on and flicking away. Look at these lovely grass-like marks you can make. So the one at the bottom, that one's very wet. So because watercolour bleeds together, you get a very soft background. So really good for doing distant grass. And then this one's slightly towards the dry side, but still a bit wetter. And then very dry here. So you get those lovely marks. But you can go on for ages with it. The drier it is, what will happen, you need to push a bit harder, but the paint will skip over the bubbles on your watercolour paper, on your rough paper. And you got more textural marks. That's better. What's better, Hilary? What's better? You can see better. Maybe. Okay, so we're going to be using those marks, but shorter versions when we come to do this field going up the middle, the furrows. We'll use a sponge and we'll be using stippling brush. Okay, so dry brushing is a really cool technique. Let me get another piece of paper because I filled that one up. I've been overzealous, wasting my paper. What am I like? Okay, dry brushing you can also do with your normal brush, with your round brush. So I'm going to load this up. My brush is barely damp. There's quite a bit of water in my paint. So I'm just going to get rid of that excess and make sure. Okay, so my brush is fairly dry. And if you're doing a large area, say it's a bit, I should have picked up the yellow ochre actually. Maybe it's a sandy beach or something like that, and you want to bring some texture in. Using your dry brush on the side, I've gone from one extreme to the other. Really drag your brush over the page, backwards and forwards. Really pick out that pigment that you've got in the brush. You don't want lots of paint for this. So if this was a beach, pebbly, sandy beach, it wouldn't be green. It would be yellow. Ah, the darker paint. Can you see how that has skipped across the paper and give you this kind of texture? Okay, that's really good. As I say, for things like sandy beaches, what I would generally do is put a wash down. Remember we did the washes yesterday. I would put a very pale wash down underneath, and then I would bring the dry brush. Once that had dried back, I would get the dry brush technique. Just do it again, just load in my brush, get rid of the excess and scrape it. Really rub down, push that brush against the paper. This really only works, well, it does work on smooth paper, but you don't get as many bumps. You will still get the streaks, but you won't get the bumps. I'm going to turn the light on that I normally have. That's okay, Nina. Smooth paper's fine. As I say, you will get it. I'm just going to turn this other light off because I think it's too bright in here, and open the curtain instead. Adjusting the light. No, that's no good either. Sorry guys, I'm just conscious that you really need to see what's going on the screen, so let me try some different scenarios with my lighting. That's better. Okay, I'm back. Oh, take my perch. So dry brushing. Always, if you dry brush over damp paper, all that will happen is your marks will dissipate and soften out. Okay, so dry brushing, a lovely technique. Let's get on to some sponge action, so shall we? Okay, I'm going to start with my household sponge, my scourer. It was a scourer sponge. I'm just going to dampen it. And again, depends on how much water you use as to the effect you're going to get. If it's very wet, then your marks are not going to stand out. They're going to blur together. Just always bear in mind what happens when your paper's wet and how the paint will move around. So this is just barely damp. If we've got feeler vision, that would be useful. I'm going to tap it into, I'm going to go for a darker colour. I'm going to tap it into the blue. Just pick some blue up on the sponge. Now you can get rid of excess again on your tissue there. And you're just going to use it to make marks. Just push down and you'll create some interesting marks. Move it around. It's quite small. The marks are quite tight together because there isn't much texture in this sponge. But again, it's a really good tool. So this is a sponge that I'm going to use when I first mark out the furrows in this field. Okay. And then I'm going to use my stippling brush over the top. And then we've got our natural sponge. I love the natural sponge. You get so many marks out of this, different kinds of textural marks. So I'm just going to dab that into my wet paint. If your paint is wet already in your pan, or if you're using tube paint, make sure your saturation's quite strong. Okay, and I'm going to tap this one down. Look at the difference between those two marks. You can see how this one's already looking like a foliage, like a tree, like a shrub, like a bush, just from using the sponge. The trick, as I say, is getting the wetness right. Squeeze out, wet your sponge, squeeze out the excess. You're going to get mucky doing this, guys. No apologies for that. Get rid of the excess water on your kitchen towel. Then go into your paint and just have fun making those marks. So we're going to use this to do our trees, our tree line, and also for this foliage in the foreground. Just using our sponges. There's another way you can use the sponge. Let me go back to another sheet. I'll just get a bigger piece so you can see, right? A great big chunk of natural sponge and my brush. Actually, just before I do that, so you can, before I go on to the big sponge, I've just thought of something I didn't show you. I'm going to go into my yellow first with my natural sponge, and I'm going to tap down that bright yellow. And just like yesterday about mixing colours on the go, you can just mix. So I'm going now into the green, and I'm going to tap the green in amongst the yellow. And look at that for an effect. Really easy effect to do. Why spend hours with a paintbrush trying to do something that a sponge will do for you in seconds, literally seconds? So that's putting one colour down first and then another colour stamped over the top. And I'm going to call it stamping. Okay, now this time I'm going to bring some paint to my sponge. I'm going to go orange. I'm just picking some bright colours so you can really see. I've not used this yet today, so I really need to activate that paint. Bring some water to it, get it activated, and then I'm going to paint onto my sponge. I'm just going to paint onto the sponge there. Now I'm going to go back into the yellow. I'll go for the brighter yellow actually. Really load that up, and I'm going to paint next to it. So on my sponge, just putting that colour down next to it. So then you can print your colours side by side. You can literally get your dual colours straight down. Look at that. Hello Lauren, good to have you along. Look at that. Two colours together. So if you're doing your tree line, it's not how I did it. When I did this one this morning, I used my lighter greens at the top of and put my trees in first, and then I used the sponge with the darker colours once the first layer had dried, okay, because I wanted the darker colours to stick out. But thinking about it, this is another good way to do it. So I'm just going to turn my sponge around, and I'm going to attempt this tree using sponge effect. Okay, so I'm going to bring yellow up one at the top where I'm going to mark my tree down, yellow, and then my green underneath. Really put quite a lot of paint on that sponge so you can use it over and over. I'm going to mix some of that green into the yellow, so I'm getting yellow, yellowy green and the green, and I'm going to put a bit of blue as well. Put a bit of blue in there, because we know blue and yellow makes green, guys, yeah? Let's see if this is an epic foul or whether I succeed. Wish me luck. There we go. So you're getting your multicoloured trees, if that was a row of trees, just by using your sponge. I think I will continue doing it the way I did earlier, doing one colour first and letting it dry. But just different things that you can try out, play with at home, get a feel for how you can make those different marks. Okay, so just coming back to good old-fashioned brushes after the fun of the sponge. So my flat brush and my normal watercolour brush, you make different marks depending on two things. the angle of the brush and the amount of pressure you put down on the paper. Okay, so with the round brush, just load it up with paint here. Just using the very tip of the brush, although this is quite a big brush, turn my paper around, just using the tip of the brush and pull it across the page. I'm resting my hand, my little finger, my little dinky finger on the page to create some lines. So even with this fairly fat brush, you can get some nice, quite thin lines. And then you can use that brush again a different way. So still on the point, using the tip of the brush, then push through, more pressure to get a wider mark, come back up to the point. Drag along, push through. It's a really good exercise on control and up to the point. Okay, again, point, push down, lift up, push down, lift up. And you get this kind of ribbon effect, but it's all about the amount of pressure as to how much of the brush you're using. So to get thick lines, use all of the ferrule of the brush, and to go thin, go up onto the point. That's why it's important to have a watercolour brush with a point on it when it's wet. You can also use your round brush in a dry brush technique. So I'm just getting rid of all the excess water. I'm going to pick up a little bit more blue, and then I'm going to use between my thumb and finger to spread the bristles out. This will only work when your brush is dry. Spread them out, fan them out, so you're making like a fan brush. And dry brush, dry brush. Okay, you have to load with dry brushing. You do have to load your brush up loads, but one brush, lots of techniques. So if you haven't got a stipple brush, you can use your brush dry and push the brush apart with between your thumb and finger to make it fan out. Okay, load it up with paint, fan it out, and mark down. You could use it on its side as well, so you get an even thinner, because you've squashed the brush together on its side, it's going to be thinner. So you can do even thinner lines. There we go. Nice and fine. Excellent. So the flat brush, when it comes to doing painting, it's all about the marks you're making, different marks to show different things. So the flat brush is really cool for things like brickwork. When I'm doing portraits of people's houses and they've got red brick houses, that kind of stonework, they're really good. Again, you can use it like a stamp. All this is mark making. Using the side of the brush, just pull it through to create. I'm going to use a darker colour. Now I haven't got it particularly wet. I'm just washing it out, getting rid of the excess water, and then loading up the brush with the paint. If you want more texture to show through, have it even drier. The drier it is, it will skip over the paper and it will leave those white indentations. Can you see that? I'll bring it up closer to the camera. So you can see when it's used wet, you get a full shape of the brush and you're just using that shape of the flat brush. And when it's dry, you get these white marks where the paint skips over the paper. So really good way of, another way of getting texture, the illusion of texture into your paintings. Okay, so I'm going to put that aside and we're going to have a quick refresh on yesterday, although I did mess this up a bit. So remember about layering yesterday and glazing. In this scene that we're doing today, we've got these hills again, mountains and hills. So we're going to achieve that by using glazing and layering. Ah, if you've got a stray bristle, chop it off, Nina, or buy a new brush. It's annoying. Yeah, you just need to get the nail clippers or something and clip it off so it doesn't affect your line that you're making. So we're going to use washes to start with. I'm going to use a graduated wash for the sky, and then we're going to wash in all the other areas. The mountains I'm going to leave out. So I'm going to do the sky, I'm going to do the green areas, and I'm going to do the background to this field of wheat or dry grass, whatever it is, the yellow area with yellow ochre. So I've mixed up some colours in my palette, which I think you can just see. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to pick up, I've already stretched my paper and now I've got some green on it from my previous exercise, but never mind. I'm just going to try and lift that out. I don't want that little. Actually, I'm going to turn my board around and then the green will be in the grass. How's that? Wayne Fletcher. Hi, Wayne. I don't think I've seen your name pop up before. Nathan Harper. Are you using Crayola watercolour? No, Nathan, I'm not using Crayola. I'm using Winsor & Newton today. Okay, so I'm going to do a graduated wash for the sky. Remember we did this yesterday for you guys that were watching yesterday. I'm going to bring a band of colour across the top of my sky. Now today I don't want the sky as bright as I had it yesterday. 2 bands, a little bit darker. So you get your base colour along there. Wash your brush out. Just a little bit more. Wash your brush out and then come back in. Just touching into where you left off. Take that brush backwards and forwards. Don't worry if your brush isn't as big as this one. You can achieve the same effect with a smaller brush. So I'll go back to my smaller watercolour brush just to show you. I did say I wanted this sky pale, but that's almost see-through, and doing it on video really doesn't help. So I'm going to darken it for you guys so you can see better. So with my round brush, just come across that top. That's better, isn't it? You can see it now. A band across the top. Wash your brush out. And then back down. Okay, pull in that colour that you've got in the band down through your sky. Just go back up into the band. I want to bring that down a bit more. Slightly tilt my board so it runs in the direction that I want it to. Now the sky doesn't come down because a lot of this picture, yes I do, Nathan, watercolour and colour pencils, yep I do. And if you look back at my past videos you'll see a butterfly painting that we did with watercolour pencils. So yeah, you'll be able to see that. Have a look back at my past videos. But this week we're focusing on watercolour techniques. Okay, now we've got that background wash in. If you wanted to pull out some clouds, your sponge could be good for that too. So I'm just going to go into this darker area so you can see. Whilst it's still wet, push your natural sponge down and lift out your clouds. So remember there are other tools you can use. You can use your brush to lift out the clouds. Just twist your brush along. It'll act like a sponge and pick up the excess water and with it the paint. And you can create your clouds in a really easy way. So sponge, bit of tissue if you want, dab it in to pull your clouds out in the sky. And tilt that up. Okay, now the important thing is when we are going to bring the rest of the colours in our scene, I'll just bring that back. We want to leave a gap between the blue sky and before we put the green on, because if your colours meet, You know what happens when you've got two wet surfaces side by side. The colours will bleed together, and we don't want them to bleed together. So I'm going to go back to my watercolour brush and my green, and I'm going to leave a bit of a gap and just put my reference picture where I want it. So I'm going to leave a bit of a gap here. The mountains are going to come in there anyway. I'm going to bring the left-hand field in. Now the green that I've used is just a standard sap green, and I've added some yellow into it because I wanted it nice and bright. I'm going to bring darker colours over the top. And what we're trying to do is bring some distance into this view today. We want the path, the field, the hay to get progressively smaller as it goes back towards the horizon line to give us that sense of depth. Okay, I'm just going to, this is just mapping in, putting in your washes of colour. And this path, this field here is just coming to a point there. But it's taking me along the side of this road, this pathway that will lead us into the painting. I'm really struggling with light today, guys. Can you see okay? Are you able to follow? I don't know what I can do to improve matters. Just bear with me one sec. I'll try something else. Because it's quite bright to me on the page, but when I'm looking at my screen, it's not looking quite so bright. So I hope you can see what's going on. Okay, so I've got that filled in. And then there's some greenery that we're going to bring in the foreground. So again, I'm just putting background down. Now, because we're going to be using mark making, using a lot of dry brush techniques, we want the background filled. We want all of the paper filled with colour underneath. I'm not having any white show through in this particular painting. So the whole of the area is being covered with that very light wash. You can see it fine. Oh, thanks, Pam. Good, good. I'm worrying for nothing then. Okay, now I can't put my yellow field in until that dries. So just to speed us up as normal, here comes the hairdryer. So we're getting the basic composition in place. Now I'm going to use my yellow ochre, now that's dry, and just bring that filled in, the one coming up the middle with the furrows. Now these colours, this yellow ochre is going to end up looking really light once we get the darker yellow ochres over the top in the furrows of the field. Doesn't matter about your brush direction. We're just getting this washed down. And because there's going to be a lot of texture over the top, we're not worried like in the sky, doing our left to right, left to right. Here in the field, I've got that little bit of green in there still from earlier. There we go, it's gone. Okay, a little bit more colour to it. Remember, watercolours dry back lighter as well. Okay, now I'm going to go back. I'm ready now to start putting my trees in. For those that weren't here yesterday, when you are placing trees in your picture and you have hills and mountains in the background, this is one simple one we did yesterday. The easy way is, rather than put your mountain in first and then try and get your trees to stand out against the mountain, it's better to put your trees in first. You haven't got to worry with the mountain, as you'll see, about going over the trees, because all that will do, if your trees are dry, it will give you a glaze. It's like having glazing effect. So I'm going to start on my trees, and I'm going to have a bit of fun doing them with a bit of sponge. I'm just going to tear another piece off here because I want them quite small. So just tear off the size you need. I'm going to bunch it up like so. Bring my paints back. Dab it into my green. Actually, I'm going to put a little bit of yellow as well. I do mess my paints up. You don't have to be as messy as me. I'm picking up a bit of yellow and the green straight out of the tin. Just bunching it up into a nice little ball. So I can put, I've got a little bunch of trees over here. It gives you that really natural leafy effect of trees, guys, because you've got the gaps in between the leaves as well, that texture. Okay, I'm just going to dampen my tissue a little bit more green, a bit more yellow. I will clean these out later, I promise. Okay, and I want that a bit stronger. I really want those trees to stand out. Just tap down and just keep repeating this process. Dampen your sponge, yellow, green, and then I'm going to come to the trees over this side. Just look at the position that you want them in. Remember, you've got your field here, and the trunks of the trees are going to be coming up from that field, so you don't want too big a gap there, otherwise it's going to look a bit silly later. And just tap in our row of trees. It's great to have so many of you along today. Word's getting round, I hope. Spread the word. Okay, now I'm going to do one more layer of green over this, but I'm not going to use the yellow this time. I'm going to go straight into the green, really push it down into the paint, tighten it into a little ball and tap down. Okay, now I don't want to do any more tapping over this at the moment because it's getting quite wet, and the danger is it will all blur together too much rather than give me the texture that I want. I'm happy with how this side's come out, but this side started to blur a little bit, but that's fine. I can leave it dry. I'm your daily relaxation fix. Oh, that's lovely. Okay, yeah, leave it to dry and then bring a darker green over the top, because what we also need to do later is bring the shadows in the trees. The light source is coming slightly from the right hand side and from above, as you can see indicated by the fence post here, but the trees have got lots of shadow underneath the branches, so we want to bring some darker green over the top with the sponge later to show that off. Now I need to wait for my trees to dry. We're always waiting for something to dry. Okay, we'll wait for those trees to dry, and in the meantime we can go back to our pathway or our fields. As I've got green on my sponge, I'm going to go for the fields. Okay, now something to bear in mind, this is really important. Again, as you're looking and your fields are going back into the distance, the marks that you make need to be smaller in the distance. You can't see them so well. So in fact, right at the back of this field, I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm just going to leave the green that's down there. And as I start to come forward, I'm going to press light back here for smaller marks and then heavier here for darker marks. I'm just going to get some paint in my well here. I'm just going to refill my palette, but I do want it quite strong, not very watery. So I'm just taking some more green and putting it in here. It's quite a nice green, this. I don't feel that I need to do much with it. I quite like using it straight from the tin. Some greens you get are horrendous, but this Winsor & Newton one's very nice. I do, Nathan. I put some blue in my green, or I just mix with blue and yellow and make my own green. Sometimes I'll use a bit of brown or a bit of red in the green. Red's really good for darkening. If you want it really dark, then I'd add some red. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up some more paint and just start putting my marks down to create the grassy texture of this field. So I'm not pressing too hard at the back here, just tapping it on lightly, just to give us the texture of the grass, the field. the weeds, probably. Just bounce that sponge, just pick up a bit more stronger pigment from there. Tap your sponge on, leave that bit at the back, and then as I'm coming closer, pick up more paint, press harder, stronger mark, stronger colour, and bigger. Things are in the foreground are bigger, you can see more, so you're getting that sense of space. Big blousy marks up front, small tiny ones in the back, and it's just the pressure that you're putting on your brush to achieve that. So I'm going to go back into the other field, the same thing. I'm going to leave it blank at the back. I'm just going to press lightly at the front. Another cool thing to use in your paintings for texture is bubble wrap. Paint on some bubble wrap. You want some cool effects, something more abstracted. And just print down with bubble wrap. So tapping into that field. I'm going to bring a little bit more yellow into this field at the back. I'm just going to squeeze out my sponge. Remember, don't have your sponge too wet. Into the yellow. And overlay that yellow just to bring a bit of brightness here and there. And again in this field. It's a really mucky thing to do, but it's fun. There we go. Now you could also use your stippling brush if you want to bring a bit more texture. So I'm going to go in with my stippling brush with a nice flat end, pick up some more paint and bring some stronger grass-like marks up the edge of this field in the foreground. So all the techniques we practiced earlier that I've showed you earlier, pick up that paint, get rid of the excess and just pick up to create some like effect at the front of this field too. A bit shorter, just add some strength. And then as Nathan just said, I'm going to mix up a darker green, blue, yellow, a bit of yellow ochre, a bit more blue, a bit more yellow. It's good to mix your own colours up. There we go, that's nice and dark. I'm going to go with my sponge again. Squeeze out all the excess water. The more colours that you put in, the more interest you'll get and the more sense of depth. Just tapping some of this darker green in the foreground areas. So bear with me one sec, guys. Okay, now my trees are dry, I think. Nearly, still a little bit wet. So I'm going to carry on with my green and bring in this foreground area. Again with the big sponge, lots of green on here because this is going to be the strongest colour. It's closest to us. So really big marks, really push down with your sponge to create this much bigger patterns in the foreground. So you can see the different size marks here, really pushing down, getting the sense of foliage that's close to you, and then smaller marks over here. There we go. Oh, Nathan, you're talking about under the trees or on the ground? Two different things, my friend. We'll touch that when we get over there. But yeah, there is a cast shadow on the ground as well. Okay, so we've got some nice foliage going on here. Now, let's go back to our sky. I'm just going to give this a quick blast with a hairdryer to make doubly sure my trees are dry. And we're going to bring in the mountains. Now for the mountain range, I want a slight hint of green to them, but pretty much I'm going to use the sky colour that I had earlier. I'm going to bring some of that into another well, so I've got the same base colour as the sky. But I want to tone it down a bit. I want to grey it down. So I'm going to add some brown. Brown and blue will give you a grey. And if you're using this greeny blue that I've got here, it will give your grey will have a slight green tinge to it. A bit more brown in here. Just go slowly when you're mixing your colours. A little bit too much and it will change really quickly. Always test your colour first, see if you're happy with it. That's quite nice. I want it quite soft, quite close to the shade of the sky, because this is a distant hill. Things that are in the distance are paler, remember. So I'm just going to take this, and I'm not worried about my trees. I'm going to take my mountain behind the trees, and if it overlaps the trees. It's not going to do any damage. All you're going to do is give those trees another glaze, another layer of colour. Down, over this side, and back down again. So I'm getting this nice, soft, distant hill coming in. Just have fun with it. You haven't got to think about any particular shape. Yeah, Nathan, if you don't let your layers dry, absolutely, everything will just run together and your colours will merge together and you will end up with mud. So being a bit patient or having a hairdryer on standby is the key. Now I'm going to carry on with this hill, this colour, further down where the other hill is going to reside. Go straight over that tree. It's not done any damage. In fact, it's going to help me on my way to darkening that foliage down. Glazing, remember from yesterday. We're going to give this another layer because we want another row of hills. One hill and then one that's closer to us. And each time we're doing the hills getting closest to us, we're going to add another layer of glaze. So I'm just going to give that another dry with the old hairdryer. Okay, and with your glazing, guys, you don't want to press too hard. You don't want to scrub because you can reactivate that dry paint underneath. So when you're putting your glazes on, they need to be nice, soft glazes. So I'm just going to darken this mix just slightly, a bit more brown in it. And just the fact that we're layering is going to make it darker anyway, but I want it much darker, this one. So this one I'm going to come from the side of the tree here, because it's lower hills that are hidden behind there. Come up to the edge of that tree and down. And we're starting to get that sense of distance. Very easily bringing these marks in. Take it behind the tree. And if you go over the leaves, it really doesn't matter, so long as you're gentle. Now that tree is now popping out against that hillside. You've got the real dark layers now. You can really start to see this build up. I've left a bit of a white line because I want to bring a different colour to a nearer hill that's here in green. So I'm just going to use a wet brush. Remember what happens when you put water next to the wet paint. It will just soften that line, so you won't have a hard line. It will just bleed in to this area below the tree, a nice wet line, and just let that paint bleed down. Tip your board to encourage it. Your board should be on a very slight tilt anyway when you're working. Okay, again I need to let that dry, but I'm not going to get the hairdryer out again. We're going to move back down to the field, guys. So this time I want my household sponge. I don't want so many dimples and nodules, so I'm going to tear off a small piece of the household sponge. I'm going to be using this narrow edge. I'm going to go into my yellow ochre. I'm just going to put a bit of water on my yellow ochre and clean it up because I had green over the top there. Clean that up. Push my sponge in so it's quite dry. I'm going to start at the front and work back. Now, again, what I said earlier about things being larger that are closer to you and smaller when they go recede away was the same with the marks that you're going to make for the furrows in this field. So I'm going to press down quite hard here. And then release the pressure as I go down the side of this field for my first furrow. Just gently tap as you go away into the distance. By not pushing so hard, your mark's also going to be smaller. A little bit of water, tiny bit of water. You just want this damp, guys. I'm just going to pick this up because it keeps popping out. Just going to pick the pan up. Okay, and again, some push down. Quite large here. Trying to keep a straight line. Pressure easing up as I go back. I want it lighter and smaller as that goes off into the distance. And again, so you just keep repeating that process. Also, your lines are going to get closer together as they go into this distance. The road narrows, and it's really just the optical illusion of things going into the distance. Tiny marks as we go back. This is all helping take us on a journey into this little painting. Tap back, big marks up front. You can see how far just one tap goes of the paint onto your sponge. Whoops. I'm not doing straight lines like I did this morning. I'm taking this round a curve. So I want a bit more movement in it. And again. Push down hard. Release. Just come up onto the tip of it. Gentle pressure as you go into the background. Push down hard. The lines are coming closer together. See how far you can go with just that first load. I'm just going to take these furrows across this field here. They're all in the foreground. So you start to get that sense of distance again. Just going to strengthen this here a little bit. It's gone a bit stronger there. Okay. There we go. So we're starting to get that sense of space and of distance. Hopefully now my background will have dried. No, it hasn't, so not to worry. What I'm going to do now is go back to my stippling brush, guys. All these different techniques, just different mark making. I'm going to pick up some more of my yellow ochre. Quite dry brush this time. And I'm just going to flick, put this where you can see it, place it on and flick up to give some longer grasses in the foreground. Just tap it on the edge of the brush on the page and flick it up. Keep reloading. Because my brush, I'm doing dry brush technique, there's very little water, so I need to keep tapping it on my pan and just flick up. Get some sense of movements and direction, but you don't want too much of that in the background because you wouldn't be able to see it. Over here. A little bit more going up over the front of this green field. There we go. Looking good. Well, I think it does. We're all still got 28 of you watching. Excellent, guys. Thanks for staying with me on this one. It's a bit longer today. There's a bit more to take you through. Okay, so I'm going to put another heel in, yet another heel into view. So I'm just taking my green again, the green that we used in the fields, just straight out of the pan. Actually, I'm going to darken it just slightly with a little bit of blue. Just slightly darker colour. And I'm going to bring that in here at the base of these trees. Just coming up over that hill. Behind those trees. Up again at the end. Not sure I like that colour so much, but remember, you can mix. I want it a bit more sagey. So I'm going to take my yellow ochre and whilst that's still wet, work that in. Purely because I didn't like the colour green that I mixed up. Maybe you'll do better. Okay, I'm just going to lighten it a little bit by dragging a dry brush through and lifting some of that intense colour out. I want it softer. There we go, that's better. I'll bring it up closer to the camera so you can see those colours. You can see how they go behind the trees. I'm not worried, the tree trunks are going to come in front. We're getting this illusion of distance. The colours things are getting smaller and bigger as they come forward. Let's tilt it that way, you can see better. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my trees. And instead of the sponge, I'm going to use my stippling brush to put some darker colours in the bottom part of the tree. So I'm going to mix another green first. I'm just going to go with my primary blue with a little bit of yellow to get this nice dark. Now I want the colour not only to be dark, but I want it not to have too much water. I want it to be strong. So for the colour to be strong, you don't want too much dilution. So I'm mixing the colours, picking up more pigment. So it's more pigment than water. Okay, so I've got this nice dark green in my lid. I'm actually going to add a little bit of yellow ochre to that. Sage it down a bit. The yellow ochre just gives it a more natural colour. A bit more blue. There, I think I'm happy with that as a shadow colour. So stippling brush, load it up. Get rid of excess. And I'm just bringing this into the underside of the trees. Just where the leaves down here will be in shadow. And just tapping in those underlying branches, giving it a bit of shape, a little bit of form. And you can keep doing this. You can keep layering up, making them darker. I'm also going to put a little bit of blue straight in there as well. Just tap it over the top to really strengthen that. Don't be scared of going in with the blue. Remember that optical illusion as the colours mix together. A few branches up here that are going to be in shadow too. There we go. Just clean off my stippling brush. I just want to bring a bit more light to the top of the trees. A bit stronger colour, so I'm going straight with my yellow over the top with the stippling brush. You could use your sponge again if you like using the sponge. There we go, nearly there. Okay, so now all we need to do is bring the trunks in. Okay, now you can either use, the trunks are quite tiny because they're in the background. You could use a rigger brush, which is like this with a nice long bendy end to it, long bristles. Oh, just to let you know, guys, I've put in a big wholesale order of art supplies. I noticed last night that Hobbycraft are out of absolutely everything. Cass Art have shut down their website temporarily. So I've ordered some more products from my wholesaler that should be with me by the end of the week. And I will have some rigger brushes, because I know I keep mentioning to you about rigger brushes. So I'll have some if you want to buy some from my website. Okay, right, now for the trunks of the trees, I'm going to bring a bit of my practice paper back just to show you. We want a black or something that looks very dark. I don't like using black in my work, so I mix my own using the dark blue and the brown. I'll just start some off here. If you mix dark blue with the brown, you will get a really rich grey black, more charcoaly. Now, when you're mixing, it takes some practice, guys. Sometimes it can be too brown, sometimes it can be too blue. Just get into the practice of mixing your grey tones up. You could fill a whole sheet using just using brown and blue together in different quantities to see the different range of greys. You can bring the most beautiful greys, can't you, Nathan? You just said you like doing this too. Excellent. Now, for a very strong colour, if you're not using tube paint and you're using pans, I'll go into the edge of the blue, edge of the brown, blue, brown, blue, brown, blue, brown. I'm going to end on the brown because I want it to be more towards the brown colour. Look at that colour. Always test it on a scrap of paper beside you to make sure you've got it right. But I want it really strong, so that's why I'm going straight just on the corner, blue, brown, blue, brown, blue, brown. And I'm just going to bring some random trunks up from this field down here. We don't want them all straight. Just lose them as they go into those underlying branches. We're not putting any detail in, they're distant trees. Might bring a little branches, a couple over and off. Is that enough? Yeah, that'll be enough. Maybe another branch here. If you wanted to, you could bring some here and there through the trees just to add to that darkness as well, whilst you've got that lovely rich colour on your brush to really define the shadow areas. Just pop some of that right on the base of those trees. Look at that. I know you can't see it so well because I'm not so close. I'm going to lower the camera a little. Let's bring you on down. Woo! There we go. Hopefully you can see a bit better now. So same again over the other side. Blue, brown, blue, brown. End on the brown. Root your trunk in this field here and come up. Just using the tip of the brush into your trees. Some interesting shapes. Some of them are straight, some of them are leaning. Okay, and again, whilst I've got this on my brush, I'm going to give some illusion of some even darker shaded areas coming into the bottom of these trees. I'm just letting my brush dance over the paper, no particular mark in mind, just letting it bounce across the paper. There we go. So you get that real richness of colour coming underneath. You get the real strong colours coming into the base of those trees. Okay. Lastly, down here, we need to bring some shadow because the light's coming from above. The trees have shadow under here in the lower branches. There's also going to be a cast shadow in the field that they're sitting in. So I'm going to use the same colour that I used for the mountain up here. A little bit of a grey, maybe pull a little bit more green in. And just bring some cast shadow under the trees. Yeah, that colour's working good. Just dropping some of that mountain colour I was using on the ground under the trees, because the light's diffusing through the trees and the shadow's quite short because the light's directly above. So you've not got long shadows coming through, just this light, just dropping this greeny grey colour. Whoops, picked up the wrong one, picked up blue. Just to get that dappled light falling into the field. It's all telling us a story. Just drag that along there, a little bit more. Super. You could use some of this here as well. This colour be quite good in the fog. Bring some strength of colour into the edge of the fields whilst I've got it on my brush. Just going to use it up. Bring some strong colour into the foreground. Playing around. Okay, one more thing to do. What have I missed? What have I missed? I've missed the fence. Now, I've got some white showing. If I bring the painting I did earlier forward, can you see the highlight on the edge of this fence? And yet we don't use white. I hate white. I hate using gouache or gouache. I just find it too flat. So the reason I told you to have a craft knife is we're going to scrape out the white, the highlight on the fence. The other thing you could use is masking fluid. Let's see if I've got any nearby in my bag of tricks. No, my masking fluid has gone missing. So you can buy your masking fluid or drawing gum, it's also known as, comes in different colours. And you can use it to protect your paper, protect the white of the paper for your highlight. So you put your masking fluid on the side of the fence posts, let it dry, and then just do your painting. And then at the end, you just rub it off. Your painting has to be totally dry, and you can just rub and peel the masking fluid off. But for such a small area, I don't think it's worth the fuss. And as it's the last thing we're going to do today, we'll just use our craft knife to scrape out. Just be careful not to go right through the paper. So back to my small brush. Okay. I'm going to go into the yellow. No, I'm going to go into the brown. I've got a burnt umber brown here. What was that, Nina? Up by the last mountain, ended a bit strange. I think I've missed a comment here, Nina. I'm not quite following. Message me afterwards if you need to. Okay, same thing applies with this fence. I forgot I've moved the camera angle, so I need to change my angle. Posts that are close to us are going to be big and strong, larger and closer to us. And you want your paint quite strong because you're going over the greens in the background here. Also, the posts closest to us are quite wide apart. It's just the illusion of distance to bring this strong brown over the top. The gaps will get shorter and tighter in the fence post as you go into the distance, because we cannot see those gaps. I'm just bringing my fence post, and now they're going to start getting closer together as they're going away and getting smaller and shorter. Tiny little marks into the distance. Okay. Now I'm going to take my yellow ochre, nice and strong again, the mustard yellow, and bring it right alongside the brown. Just getting this nice woody colour. You're not going to see so much colour back here either, so just find a bit of tissue. As the fence recedes, the colour also isn't as strong, so I'm just going to bring some tissue over the top and push that back, the fence that's going into the distance, so it's not as strong as the fence in the foreground. Okay, now I'm going to take my really dark brown, in fact I'm going to do my blue, brown, blue, brown, blue, brown trick again, and I'm going to bring the shadow area of the post quite strong along this edge. These details in the foreground just really make it pop. Blue, brown, end on the brown. Giving that three-dimensional look, and again as I go back here I'm just hitting a little touch because you really can't see any detail back there, but nice and strong on these posts up close to us. There we go. And then we've just got to the really fiddly bit. Again, when you're doing small thin lines, you don't want your brush too dry, otherwise it's going to pull. So if you want to practice your thin line first, I'm going to turn my page to help me. So I'm left-handed. I want to bring this black line coming from post to post, just up on the tip of my brush, and going off the page. And again, these lines are coming together and getting tighter together as we go back into the distance. How's that? Yeah? You can see that okay? Fantastic. So the last thing we're going to do is use our craft knife. Now, of course, you can carry on tweaking your painting. You can add some more darks, a bit more definition in this foreground area if you want to. Don't overwork it though, keep it nice and fresh. So I'm going to use my craft knife and I'm just going to scratch along this edge, taking off that top layer of paper. It's best to wait for it to dry so you don't smudge your work, and just pull a highlight. You could try lifting out, but to be honest, to do such a small area of white is going to be really difficult. So just scratching out just to bring that white highlight. You could do your fence white, this black line that I've done. You could bring that and scratch that out. That would look quite cool in white as well. So it's really, I'm not going to go all the way back again. I'm going to go to about midway and then stop, because you're not going to see the highlights. So scratching out, just scratching the top surface of the paper gives you that highlight on your post. Did you enjoy that, guys? Was that interesting? Some new tools and techniques. Using the lessons we learned on Monday, doing the glazing and layering of colours to bring these different tones and strengths in your mountains. Remember, don't worry about the mountains. Put your trees in first and your mountains after. And use your stippling brush and sponges to create texture. And use your craft knife, very sneaky, to bring these little highlights, those little highlights in on the side. Always think about the size things get as they move away from you. Okay, make things get smaller and it will take you on that journey and it will give you that sense of distance. Strength of colour is one thing that will help you with that illusion of space and the size and detail getting less. So great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining me again today. I will be setting another challenge. I think tomorrow we're doing the bird. So I have posted already. There's a little bird that we're going to be working on tomorrow just to get away from the landscapes for a little while. And I'll be showing you some more techniques. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day and I'll see you all soon. Bye.